All right, welcome everybody to our second of several webinars with Project Echelon, where we are joined by Dr. Mike Brooks, or Mike as he prefers to be called, um, as he supports us in just our journey of learning more about mental health, how to grow a healthy state of mental health, and the different things that we can do to positively impact that so that we can empower ourselves to lead better lives, be more successful in the workplace, uh, be stronger members of community and society. All of those things that we strive to do. And so we thank Mike for his time and his sharing of knowledge and background. And I guess without too much further ado, we'll get this thing underway. So thank you, Mike. Thank you for everybody that's here. And I'm excited to do some learning with you today.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Eric. Again, big thank you to Project Echelon, uh, to Joe for bridging the introduction and allowing me to come in. And really, I'm just hanging out with you guys, telling you a little bit about what I know. I don't think it's a lot more scientific than that, but I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys. So, I mean, again, thank you again. Um, So today we wanted to talk about, sorry about that. We wanted to talk a little bit about PTSD. Sorry about the white screen, but I'll clean that up. Um, and today's topic is really pretty organic in its origins. I've been a part of Project Echelon for all of a few months, and I've heard a lot of talk about trauma, and I wanted to be sure that we all had the same foundational basis when we use that word. So I thought we would just open up some discussions about trauma, what it is, and and what it looks like, and what the treatment could be. Um, Trauma has some personal history with me. I have an uncle, one of my favorite uncles, who uh, he's 71 now. Yeah, and he has fought in every major conflict from Vietnam to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. He came out of retirement to be a sniper in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, but he did all his work with the Navy. He did 22 years nuclear subs with the Navy. And I've told Eric Beach and Eric Hill about this movie, The Five Bloods, that's out on Netflix. It's a Spike Lee movie. I'm a Spike Lee fan. He went to my alma mater, so I try to watch Spike Lee movies, and it's called The Five Bloods. It's a movie about some guys who all fought in Vietnam. It's actually Chadwick Boseman's one of his last movies that he did because he's in it, and they had like this 35-year reunion where they go back to Vietnam to revisit some of the things that happened, but then they have a, a, a low-key B story mission that they do that I think is terrible. But the part that I did find interesting was the guys going to Vietnam and reliving some of the things that they did. And I realized in that moment, I don't know anything about Vietnam. That the stuff that I think I know is really just garbage. So I called my uncle and I said, dude, what can you tell me about Vietnam? How bad was it? And not to get into his personal story, but he was like, I don't really like to talk about Vietnam because it was that bad for me. And I asked him if he had any PTSD, and he said, absolutely, I do. And I said, what does that look like? And he spoke of everyday things that you and I may engage in, but he says that's a trigger for me. And he has to fight the urge to go do something that may be dangerous to him and other people. And that's on a very regular basis. Um, so I think that this conversation is necessary. I think this conversation should be much more widespread and common than we make it. And so I kind of applaud Project Echelon for wanting to at least be here, or maybe I'm the only one that's on the outside, but I don't think I am. So We want to break down just what is trauma and be better informed. That's the only objective that I really have for us today. But we'll talk about treatment of trauma and what it looks like. And I'm going to try to stay away from wartime trauma. And I think I will talk about other kinds of trauma, and then we can apply that to any personal trauma that you may experience in your military lives or not. Because I realize that trauma can be experienced prior to and definitely after someone has done their time in the armed forces. Like always, if there are any questions, please go ahead and shoot them out there, or we can use the chat option if you want. I may need help though if someone puts something in the chat because I can't really see it because of my screen setup. So first thing, let's talk about what is trauma. What is it? So there's this organization called SAMHSA, and SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It was founded by Congress in 1992. It was born out of the Department of Health and Human Services, also known as HRSA. SAMHSA's mission is to lead public health efforts to advance the behavioral health of the nation. Specifically, one of SAMHSA's core missions is to provide current behavioral health data research and evaluation information to practitioners, people like me, health promotion specialists, policymakers, and consumers. SAMHSA has a ton of money that they make available to people who want to study the effects of trauma or the effects of substance abuse. And so it's ironic that SAMHSA provides a definition for trauma. So trauma, according to SAMHSA, results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening. And this is the part that makes it trauma, in my opinion, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So it's really in this part right here, this middle part, lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, spiritual well-being. So, if we are on an airplane and we hit turbulence, that's traumatic. Everyone, the natural response is to be fearful of that event, but it's when the event continues on to the extent that it has an effect on our other aspects of life makes it trauma. What also is trauma? So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network defines trauma as a series of events that involves fear, that should be, or threat. So the Child Traumatic Stress Network, a little simpler definition, but still, I think all the elements are there. So anything can be traumatic. In anything that is going to bring about fear. When your parents discipline you, sometimes that can be traumatic, whether it's intentional or not. The one aspect of trauma that we don't speak enough about is we can all go through the same events and have different reactions. So everyone's trauma is going to be different. If we're all in the same airplane, there's always one guy who's always like, yeah, these things happen, and he could, sip coffee, read the newspaper, and never miss a beat. People can fall asleep and we can fly through a thunderstorm. And then there are some who react to every bump in the plane. So everyone is going to respond to trauma differently. The other aspect that we don't talk enough about is the other factors that could contribute to your trauma or how you react to the trauma. So what do you mean by that? If I'm stressed, or if my other aspects of my life are out of balance, then the traumatic event that may normally have no effect on me may have a tremendous effect on me. You know, if you lose your job and your spouse leaves you and then you lose your house, then it's expected for you to have a much more intensified response as opposed to you just having one of these things and the other areas are pretty well established. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And this is what makes trauma so complex. We have another definition from trauma by Bezel van der Kolk. Serious guy here, psychiatrist, researcher, professor of psychiatry at Boston University, one of the world's leading experts on post-traumatic stress, especially when it comes to how trauma affects the brain, body, and nervous system. So van der Kolk says that traumatization occurs when both internal and external resources are inadequate to cope with the external threat. So that goes back to what I said before. Your internal resources could be your health, could be your stress levels. Your external resources could be your finances, your family support, whether or not you know, in counseling, we have this thing called orientation to 4. That's the number 4. That's person, place, time, and space. So if you take any of these orientations and they are, I'll just use a non-technical term, they're out of whack, then you could be susceptible to something or anything that could have long-term effects. Remember last time we spoke of HALT, never get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired. All of those aspects or variables could affect how you respond to trauma. At the moment, and this is from Herman, 92 and 97, 2 publications. At the moment, the victim is rendered helpless by an overwhelming force. Traumatic events overwhelm the ordinary systems of care that give people a sense of control, connection, and meaning. The severity of traumatic events cannot be measured on a single dimension. Simplistic efforts to quantify trauma ultimately lead to meaningless comparisons of horror. The salient characteristic of a traumatic event is its power to inspire helplessness and terror. So again, ongoing lasting effects of trauma is what makes it common. So we've seen that in the past 3 slides. Trauma, what makes trauma is that it lasts and it has ongoing power. Any comments? Just want to pause there. Any comments real quick? All right. So let's get to the causes then. All right. What causes something that's going to bring about fear that could last or go beyond whatever my internal and external resources are able to cope with? And as we said before, this is just a quick down and dirty list, but the trauma can be more than this. Physical abuse can bring about trauma, and that could also be bullying. Real quick, and Eric, this is for free. This is not part of what I bill you guys for. But bullying, there are 3 factors necessary for bullying to take place. 1, we need a bully, an aggressor. 2, we need a victim or someone to be bullied. And 3, we need an audience. We need someone who's going to watch. So if we remove, or the way that we teach people to deal with bullying actively, is we want to attack the audience. We want to remove the person who's just there watching. If you attack the audience, then the bullying scenario tends to go away. So just put that somewhere. And if you are being bullied, or you know someone who's being bullied, because adult bullying is real and it definitely still happens, then attack the audience, attack the person who's watching. And don't attack them, because then you're going to become a bully yourself. I don't mean that, but you want to diffuse the situation by removing that factor. Anyway, the other sources or causes of trauma: sexual abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, or community violence, emotional abuse, neglect, emotional or physical, parental mental health issues, chronic depression, suicide, institutionalized parents, incarcerated parents, addiction, substance abuse, natural disasters, hurricanes, fires, floods, um, and sudden or violent death of a loved one, and witnessing a war or genocide. Um, natural disasters is one that I highlighted because that I wanted to talk about natural disasters. Hurricane Katrina is one of the most talked about phenomena um, in counseling and in psychology because it covered such a vast knowledge base, and it also exposed so many disparities that the country was unaware of. Um, we are all probably too young to remember Hurricane Betsy from 1961. Um, Hurricane Betsy struck or hit the New Orleans area. I forgot what category it was, but the Army Corps of Engineers flooded the levees for damage control. But when they flooded the levees, when they blew up the levees, actually, um, they flooded neighborhoods, and so there's actual footage, and I saw the footage of the levees being bombed, of them exploding, and of the water pushing into the neighborhood. So that's the trauma. Hurricane Katrina created a whole nother level of trauma that people who were living in New Orleans in that era just came about and relived. So Hurricane Katrina re-traumatized a good number of people from New Orleans, and we're just learning. I shouldn't say just. Hurricane Katrina was 2005, 15 years ago, but we're still aware of the effects of Hurricane Katrina, as well as Hurricane Betsy, and what was done to deal with Betsy and what was re-experienced by Hurricane Katrina as a result of Betsy, all under the big umbrella of trauma. So it's a bigger deal than we give it credit for. It's probably something that we need to not take lightly um, because it can have long-term effects, as you can see. So if someone is exposed to trauma, there is an association made and stored in the brain related to the traumatic event, like Hurricane Betsy and its experience relived through Hurricane Katrina. This is often due to the sensory perception of the trauma. For example, if a person is involved in a car accident, the person uses multiple sensory inputs, including sight, smell, or hearing. These sensations are stored in the natural pathways of the brain and do not go away. The brain can retain these sensory perceptions regardless of whether the trauma was chronic or acute. Okay, so I can say that again. The brain can retain these sensory perceptions regardless of whether the trauma was chronic or acute. So people can still smell the fire that they were in, or they can still hear people yelling if that was part of the experience. If the trauma is not treated, emotional responses and symptoms will continue until the trauma is treated and worked through with therapy and emotional support. It is important to note that not all individuals experience trauma in the same way, and how the trauma manifests itself is as individual as the person who experiences the trauma. There are events that happen to us each day that are considered non-traumatic. These events can include an altercation with a superior at work, or an unexpected car trouble, which will not require treatment and may diminish over time. A person will effectively work with their superior to overcome work issues, or the unexpected car trouble will be resolved through a good mechanic. For some, even an altercation with a superior or unexpected car trouble can become a larger issue, though. So if the trauma goes untreated, um, one can experience terrifying memories, one can experience PTSD, one can seek out alcohol or drugs to quote unquote feel better or to numb themselves or disconnect yourself from others. So, or a combination of these four options. Um, some signs of post-traumatic stress disorder have to do with the brain and body's hyperarousal in the wake of a traumatic threat. Because the brain interprets the traumatic event as a present danger, natural fight or flight reactions become engaged and sometimes prolonged during re-experiencing of the event. In combination with general hypervigilance that so often accompanies PTSD, these signs of hyperarousal can amount to an exhausting and stressful experience for the survivor. Insomnia is one PTSD symptom that is associated with hyperarousal. Irritability is another symptom of hyperarousal. Um, Others experience constant hypervigilance, seeking to interpret virtually any sign, any slight physical or psychological cue, and assess the possibilities of further danger. So please bear with me on this next slide here. To make a diagnosis of PTSD is not simple, and it should not be simple. It should be a little complex. So there are 17 signs of PTSD. Signs of PTSD can range from flashbacks to nightmares, panic attacks to eating disorders, cognitive delays to lowered verbal memory capacity. Many trauma survivors also encounter substance abuse issues as they attempt to self-medicate the negative effects of PTSD. So we have these four areas, if you will. And in some of these areas, like I left number 3 and number 4, as you would find them in the diagnostic manual or the ICD. 2 of these 3 are required and 1 is required to meet the criteria. But there are 17 signs, so under 1 there would be like 4 or 5 expanded examples of stress, and under intrusion symptoms there would be 4 other options. So again, under stressor, the person was exposed to an injury or severe illness that was life-threatening, which includes actual or threatened injury or violence. And this may include, and we only need one of the following to meet the criteria: direct exposure to trauma, witnessing a trauma, exposure to trauma by being the first responder, such as a policeman, firefighter, medic, or crisis counselor, and learning that someone close to you has experienced trauma. So let's pause right there. I'm gonna go back. So when we talk about what is trauma, and remember, if we go back to this natural disaster, Hurricane Trina, or in a few days, we'll have a September 11th anniversary. You know, one thing that SAMHSA required for first responders is that they all go through mandatory 6 months PTSD debriefing, because first responders, and if you don't know about first responders, you go to the area and you're only allowed to engage for so many days, and then you have to leave, go home, and then you can come back. So I think you can go to New York, for example, for 9/11 for 30 days, and then after those 30 days, you have to go back home, 6 months debriefing, and then you can go back to New York. I've done secondary responding in Haiti, and we had mandatory debriefing after coming back from that. So, and that's just the first criteria. The second one would be the intrusion symptoms. Person who's exposed to trauma and then re-experiences the trauma in one or more of the following ways. And I'm going to tell you the ways because you can't see them. again, flashbacks, nightmares, distressing and intense memories, distress or physical reactions after being to exposed to reminders, and reminders are also known as triggers. And then you can see 4, and then 5 is the change in reality, when a person becomes more easily startled and reacts to frightful experiences more fully. And then there are 2 required uh, examples that have to be met. Aggression and irritability, hypervigilance and hyperawareness, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, heightened startled response, engaging in destructive or risky behavior, difficulty sleeping or staying asleep. So if you haven't made this connection yet, then probably most of the people that we know have experienced some form of trauma, and a lot of people that we know probably have PTSD and probably are not being treated for it. So let's talk about treatment. All right. So first of all, this is what I call the old school way of treatment. After you experience a traumatic event, the chemicals in your brain can affect the way you feel. For instance, when a person experiences depression, no matter the cause, he or she may have lowered amounts of happy neurotransmitters like serotonin or dopamine. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, also known as SSRIs, help increase the level of serotonin in a person's brain. This type of antidepressant drug can help a person feel less worried or sad. So there are 2 forms of treatment for PTSD. It's recommended that if you are experiencing PTSD, you do both of the treatment forms together at the same time. So the medical aspects would be the prescription drugs, and then coupled with cognitive behavioral therapy. And the CBT would be a therapist making a connection between how you feel and how you think, and how you feel and how you think leads to what you believe. So we want to change the beliefs, and ultimately we change how you think and how you feel. And that will be played out probably through some type of group therapy as well as an individual, and then on to some type of desensitization. The newer way is something that's presented by SAMHSA. So first, let's consider a case. I have a real brief case scenario I want to read to you. So this is from Rosemary Swartz, who was a first responder to a levee that broke in Mississippi in 1993. One day I was called out of bed at 5 a.m. to go to a town approximately 30 miles away because a levee had broken. By 6 a.m., my colleagues and I were there with many of the town's people, with helicopters flying overhead, with trucks going in and out of the main road trying to empty the factories. When we got there, as far as you can see, was farmland. Okay, so as far as you can see was farmland. By 11 a.m., you could see a lake in the distance. So no lake at 6, lake at 11. By 2 p.m., the water was on the edge of the town. Being there at that town before, during, and after the water came was probably the most valuable function we performed. We were able to share in the grief of the hundreds of people as we stayed with them while their fields, houses, and workplaces were flooded. We witnessed the death of a town, and the people reacted with disbelief, anger, sadness, and numbness. Each person had a difficult story, but all grieved and were provided many an opportunity to express it. People cried as the water started rising into their houses. Some had to watch, some had to leave. At times, it was utterly silent as we all waited. There was a woman whose parents sent her away during the flood of 43, and she had been angry for 50 years about it. She was determined that her children and grandchildren would see everything. I spent 12 hours just giving support, listening, giving information, and sometimes shedding a tear or two myself. So SAMHSA, the the parent organization we spoke of earlier, has a manual called Tip 57. And so in Tip 57, what's recommended is that there are immediate interventions, meaning we need people on the ground, face to face, providing contact to those in need within the first 48 hours. The first 48 hours is crucial. Um, and so what happens is this is not necessarily counseling. This is called disaster response. But this is also the best way to treat and minimize PTSD. So basic needs. Do people have food, water, some form of shelter? Can they take a nap? Can they rest? Can they just have human contact? And then the psychological first aid. And some of these are going to be repeated, but the biggest one is stabilization. If you're cold, let's get somebody a jacket. If you have no shoes on, let's get some covering on your feet. If you need clothes, let's get this person some clothes. If you need to know where your kids are, let's go ahead and take care of that. But let's stabilize quickly within these first 48 hours so we can try to nullify what's going on with with this trauma. And that's what you got out of this this case here. You just witnessed the death of a town with the townspeople. All Rosemary did was really just be present with the townspeople. There was no counseling that happened here. There was no therapy that happened. It was just knowing that the people were not alone. And that, according to SAMHSA, is the best way to go about treating PTSD now. And then once you've stabilized and you've made these initial contacts, then we can move on to social support and coping and CBT and then exposure therapy. But first things first is we want to stabilize. So what should you do? What should you do when someone you know may be experiencing some form of PTSD? So I'm going to be a real presenter today and show you a website that I think is fairly helpful on what can be done when someone is showing signs of post-trauma. One is to provide social support. Don't pressure anyone into talking about what has happened. Let the counselors do that, but you can still provide social support, hugs, just presence, acknowledgement, very important. Do normal things with your loved ones, whatever that is. Don't stop doing the things as long as they're not dangerous. Let me go ahead and say that. But if you go out to eat on Fridays, continue to go out to eat. If your loved one likes to play softball, then let's play softball or watch movies or whatever that is. Continue to do those things. Here's one that I like a lot. Let the loved one take the lead. You don't always have to have the answers as to what to do in these scenarios, but people are pretty transparent and they will tell you what they want and what they don't want. So that's the social support. The tip 2 is also be a good listener, which may be an overlap from tip 1. And we don't necessarily know how to be good listeners as human beings. We want to be fixers, especially men. Men want to get stuff done. So let me just tell you how I'm going to fix this, as opposed to saying, you know what, I'm just going to sit back and listen. Every drug addict that I've ever known has known that drugs are not good for them. Every single one. They all knew when they smoked crack that this is a bad decision. When they sniffed cocaine, they all knew I should not be doing this. So me telling them to stop doing it was not going to be helpful. But me listening as to what led up to them using was helpful. Um, so if you can, try to be a good listener. Rebuilding trust and safety. And this is probably more for someone who's going to be in close contact with someone with post-traumatic stress disorder. There's going to be a lot of hypervigilance again. So, it's okay. This is a safe place is one way to establish trust. Letting them know that you're dependable, that they can count on you is how you build trust. Routines are great. I always say though, when you establish a routine, do it on your terms so that you can keep the routine going. Also, if you cannot make an appointment, if you cannot be available, you want to let people know early with advance notice and also offer a solution, especially if it's in a critical place. I'm going to skip the triggers. I just think that's a hard one, and that may be a little outside the purview. Dealing with volatility and anger. So I would say try to remain calm, but I will also say, know what your limitations are with dealing with anger. Anger can be a safety issue. So if there's a person who is getting angry, you definitely want to give them their space, but hopefully you can see the anger building, and possibly you can get everyone to a safe place so either they can go ahead and express their anger, or we can get them to a place where they can be angry, where they can be angry without harming someone. And this is a big one here. Take care of yourself. If you all are working with people who are living with PTSD, or if you've had PTSD yourself, and you're still in contact with people with PTSD, this could be a huge drain on your own system. So, be mindful of your own feelings, and be mindful of how much you consume of people who may have PTSD, because they could throw your life out of balance too. This slide here, this bullet says create your own support system. People who are going to call you out maybe, or make you aware you're not quite yourself today, you seem a little off. That's the support system you need. You need people in your life who are going to be unafraid of being less than positive, but still honest, and have your best interests at heart. All right. What questions do you have, or what didn't I speak on that I should have?
So, Michael, Jonathan Mayberry here,
Hey,
Columbia,
John.
South
Yeah.
Carolina. Great talk. I was wondering, a lot of us have this stuff we've been through, and being in the military, going through it, the debriefs and all that stuff didn't happen. Time passed, all that stuff. Is there anything lost in that time gap? It's been 2003. It's 2000, and there's been a little bit of intervention between then, but I'm still growing. So, what do you think? What's your advice on that, and your input on that?
Yes. Great question, John. So I would say if you are still experiencing PTSD, it's never too late to get help. I'm gonna speak generally for a second, Jonathan. So if I've had clients who have come to me for substance abuse, right? When I was working in a substance abuse facility, and so we treat the substance abuse, and when you remove the substance, then all the other mental health issues kind of emerge and manifest themselves. So oftentimes we'll find out that I was in a car accident, or I was in a a loved one died, and so I was given a painkiller to deal with the pain, and then it got so good I just kept on taking the painkiller, and then that led to other things, and then I just, anytime I felt bad, then I would do the painkiller, or I would do a substance. So, you know, if we don't address the PTSD or the main issue, the core issue, then the client could just go right back to the substance. So we haven't really achieved anything. We've just dealt with the Band-Aid. So yes, it's never too late to get help with your PTSD. I'll give the military a little bit of a pass and just say that we're a lot smarter now than we were 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And also, you know, guys, well, guys won't admit to having PTSD because that's just part of how we're poorly manufactured. But now everyone who goes through some type of traumatic event, whether they want it or not, is mandated to get counseling. And that's the biggest difference. Other questions? No, so we're good,
Well,
guys. Oh,
I have a general question, Mike.
okay.
And I guess from my perspective, right? I think a lot of times as I involve myself in this group, and obviously I'd love for it to evolve to the point where it's not so directly with the athletes, but I think the assumption can apply. But when you're in a position, you know, a stressful situation, whatever, and you're in a position of leadership, what kind of behaviors in general can you put in place to make an environment generally welcoming in the case that there are people around that, you know, are dealing with PTSD or even just have a high level of anxiety associated with the situation itself? I mean, are there certain things you can do to create a welcoming environment for people that either are dealing with PTSD or acute anxiety or mental health challenges in general? I mean, are there some general rules or guidelines as a leader that you can put in place to make sure your organization, you know, isn't obviously making that person's situation worse?
I think I understand what you're saying, Joe. I would, for some reason, I'm inclined to say I would tread lightly on making my work environment PTSD friendly. But what I would want to do is make sure if someone were having an episode or a trigger, that there was help that they could take advantage of while they were in my I don't know, my direct uh, under my direct oversight. So what that could look like is, do people feel comfortable being vulnerable? That's usually a safe environment. Um, do the participants in the environment feel comfortable kind of checking one another, you know, correcting one another, saying that this is wrong or this is right, and also receiving that type of feedback and criticism? That's another sign of a safe environment. Um, can the leader of the group be absent, but still a high level of work still take place? So I think if these three things are met, then the environment can be fairly safe and the members can be fairly vulnerable. So if one were to have an episode, they could excuse themselves or they could go get the help they need without any fear of backlash or any fear of loss in status. I think that was what would be what I'd recommend if you were to have a high number of PTS people under your auspices.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Just like, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there has to be space for it, right? Like there has to be space for the need for help or space for their needs to be off topic with what the work of the day is, right?
Sure, but there's some simple things like if we had a team of people and we knew that the team had some type of mental health challenges, maybe everyone commits to having some type of help person on speed dial in the cell phone. I keep a ready hand of the crisis counseling center, their number ready. I don't know if we want to mandate people be in therapy or counseling, but I would third party that out and just be on the ready. But also back to what I said before, people are comfortable engaging in these areas without any type of concern with being made fun of or stigma. That's what I want to say, stigma.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Thanks.
Jonathan?
What's going on?
I didn't know if you wanted to say something and Joe jumped in.
No, you're fine.
Okay, all right. Fellas, if there's nothing else, I hope you got something out of this. I enjoyed talking about it.